You might text your dad or something.
Let's see. Okay, checking in. Let's see. I had a little bit of technical difficulties, so let's see if this worked. All right, since I had some technical difficulties, I'm just going to do a quick message on Instagram to get everyone over to this live. Sorry about that. So let me share that now, and then we'll get going in a couple minutes. And sorry about that. I was totally chaotic. Okay. So let's see. Okay, I'll just give everyone about 2 more minutes and we'll get going. Also, so I'm going to be sharing my screen today, which I'm really excited about. I'm going to be sharing my PowerPoint, all about Bruce and celebrating Bruce, but I will be taking questions. So if you have questions, you can throw them in the chat any point while I'm presenting, and I'll look over, I'll check them out, and then we can go back to the presentation itself. So once we get going, no worries at all. If you want to throw a question in about what I'm talking about or the podcast in general. And let's get Bruce up here. Okay. I am sharing Bruce now. Let's see. I think you guys can see as well. And yeah, let's get it going. Once I mute all my messages. Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you so much for tuning in with me tonight. I'm so sorry for the classic technical difficulties of being told I couldn't share my stream on YouTube and I had to download all this extra stuff. Joke's on me. You can just share your stream. So incredible. Good to learn, good to thrive. And I wanted to talk tonight on the 93rd anniversary of Bruce's murder about him and really about the contributions that he made to organized labor and organized labor history in this really specific period of time from 1929 to 1931. So let's get it going. Let's see. We're going to go full presentation. All right, and I'll just make sure that worked. Okay. So, celebrating Bruce by me. Obviously, we have Bruce in the center. And I wanted to give a shout out to the multiple generations. We have my great grandma, Sarah. She's in the upper left hand corner. Then we have, of course, my grandfather, Dave. Then we have my dad, who is here tonight, Gary. And then there is me. So, all the generations down from Bruce on down. And I'm so excited to share some of the contents. If you've been following along on the podcast, in November, my dad and I and my dad's cousin Jill, we all went down to Chicago and we went through Bruce's original files. And so, what you have here is the original cedar box that Bruce's files were actually kept in, which is so cool. I wanted to give you a sampling of sort of what was in those files to tell this story. So, there were a lot of letters. Mr. Julius Brodsky is someone he corresponded with a lot. There were telegrams, court papers, work logs. That was one of my favorite finds, his 1899 work log. I mean, just so cool to find. And then newspaper clippings. So some of those newspaper clippings were from family members who then added them to Bruce's box, and then some were from Bruce himself. So kind of a mixture of things. But getting into Bruce's contributions to labor and labor history, as a quick reminder, in episode 3, The Brotherhood, we talked about the local actions in Chicago that Bruce was involved in regarding his union, Local 569, when it was attempting to amalgamate with Local 150. And we knew about those and discussed those, and we knew that they started around the spring of 1929. So here are two things from Bruce's actual papers in the Circuit Court of Cook County and then also in the Superior Court. And those are both local court bodies to Chicago, located in Cook County. And something we found when we went through his papers was extraordinary. And that's that he was also involved in a federal case. And he, along with his other friends and other local unions in the area, were attempting to bring essentially a class action type lawsuit against Huddle, the then supervisor of the International, who is the precursor to Maloney, who we talk about a lot on the podcast. And I know some of this font is small, so I will blow it up for you. And one of the ways they organized, and specifically Bruce organized, was through the Searchlight. So it became pretty quickly known to all the people, all the operating engineers in this battle, that they needed their own form of media. And so, in doing so, they really used the Searchlight to do that as a way to coordinate their different actions, their stories together, and then get their message out to the rank and file workers. And I just wanted to note that name, Joseph Grace, or Joe Grace for short, who's going to be important tonight. So, with the federal case, Joe Grace, another way they would talk about and get the message across was also through flyers to the rank and file. So, this is an example of a flyer that went out to Bruce's union. And I thought it was a great example as to how Bruce and the others began to organize in 1930. So, these are the 5 different union organizations who organized to bring this federal lawsuit. The first one is Bruce's, 569 from Chicago. Then we also had Local 324 from Detroit, Local 77 from DC. We have a local from New York, 403, and then 2 from Boston, local numbers 4 and 267. And in the beginning, all these locals had 1 or 2 representatives who were going to help coordinate this lawsuit against Huddle and against racketeering in general. And there was actually a clip that Bruce had clipped from May of 1931, actually, I believe, on this that I wanted to read to you to give you an example of really what Bruce and others were getting into. And just as a reminder, I never found a history of higher education above 8th grade for Bruce. So, I mean, as someone who has a legal background, I think it's incredible the amount of work he took on in regarding this federal lawsuit. And I know there's some cutoff in this newspaper, but bearing with me, we have 5 other cities join Chicago in an operating engineers suit. The interunion troubles of the International Union of Operating Engineers have broken out anew. It was learned today when local unions in the 5 other industrial centers of the country joined with the Chicago Local Number 569 in filing the federal court of the District of Columbia a petition for an injunction restraining Arthur M. Huddle, president of the International, from further interfering with the autonomy of the organizations in these cities. So just a brief pause. I believe this was filed in DC because that's where Huddle was based out of. Back to the article. The petition was filed by attorney A.C. Lewis, who also represented the Chicago Union in obtaining a temporary injunction in the Superior Court here against Huddle and other executive officers of the International Union. So just taking a pause here, skipping ahead, among the petitioners of the bill filed in the federal court are Denny, a little misspelling, B. Ziegler, office manager and secretary. So Dennis was one of, or Bruce, as family members would call him, was one of the main figures organizing this federal lawsuit on behalf of 569. Skipping ahead, Ziegler and Graham, representing their union, said today they are asking for relief from a system of control of their affairs which sits in violation of the laws of the organization. Huddle revoked the charter of this local without authority, they declared. No charges were filed and no notice was given. Huddle attempts to force us to consolidate with other unions which he organized. As you can see, it's a little cut out on the right-hand corner there, but you definitely get the drift of the federal action that they're all starting to coordinate. And how they coordinated was contained in Bruce's papers. So I wanted to share it with you. And that was through a lot of letter writing, like an incredible amount of letter writing, which makes sense for the time period. So Bruce often corresponded to help put out issues of the Searchlight and corresponded just honestly in a day to day way with the legal system and bringing their case. So, a quick highlight here, this is talking about Untermeyer. This was the original attorney that they had hired for their case. They end up then firing him, and there's a whole lot of commotion with that, which causes a whole lot of back and forth between Bruce and others who are coordinating. The second letter on the right is Bruce's himself, and it's talking about Maloney and Co. and sort of just the day-to-day things that are going on in the Chancery Court action, which is the local action in Chicago that's still ongoing as they're getting this federal action together. So it's really an incredible amount of work on top of the regular job and then on top of being the union secretary. It's almost another, and also be a father of 11. So here we have a fourth job in coordinating this massive lawsuit. And I wanted to highlight 2 passages here, and they really highlight Bruce's role. So this first one is from the letter from Albert McCrane to Bruce on March 2nd, 1931, saying, "The Searchlight is about ready for mailing. In fact, we'll start mailing tomorrow. I'm going to send you 1,500. It contains the little slam at Wren, and we'll have to depend on your men to get them around. The reason for sending you such a large amount being that I have not corresponded with Spiking since last October, and must therefore send you the amount that he used to receive. A lot of the stuff is old news, but decided to shoot an issue out, as our dear friends must be under the impression we are dead." I like this passage a lot because it shows a lot of the very dark humor and cheeky language they often write with one another, talking about being dead and the like, or reminding people they're still alive. But I thought it was incredible that, as we're going to find out, something happens with Walter T. Spikings, and Bruce takes his place as the man in Chicago distributing the Searchlight. So he's now in charge of distributing 1,500 copies of the Searchlight in 1931. So that's another way in which he's stepping into a larger role, helping coordinate and fight for his union. Traveling a little further back in time to November of 1930, from this letter on the right, another thing that was really common was bribery. So as Bruce becomes a larger figure fighting against Huddle and the like, we find that he gets offered a couple of positions potentially to bribe him. And this is he's being a little cheeky about it here. So he says, "Well, here's one to laugh off. I have been informed that I'm to get a job chief at one of the pumping stations for the sanitary. What in the hell do you know about that? Just what little can Richard do about that? Does the chief have to belong to Artie's racket? If so, he can go to hell. Probably they would not bother with me now since they have reformed. Well, if the job is given to me, I sure as hell will take it, and any person that bothers me may ill luck. I am just about to the end of the trail. Well, old scout, I will cut out for tonight and answer soon. As ever, your friend, Dennis B. Ziegler. So he's being offered a pretty good job here, and he knows it's very clearly so that he will fall in line and go along with Artie, who is Arthur Huddle. Another thing that's contained in these letters that I'll do a bonus episode on if there's interest is they talk in nicknames and they talk in code a lot, and I haven't decoded all the nicknames. One of those being Little Richard in this letter. And another thing, if you're following along with the traders, another thing that's really, really common in these letters is finding out who is faithful to the revolution that Bruce and others are waging in bringing this federal lawsuit, and who's a traitor, who is on the side of Huddle and trying to infiltrate the group. And Bruce and others spend a lot of time trying to figure out who the traitor is. And so here are two examples of letters. There's a lot of correspondence in November of 1930. These are between Bruce and Julius Brodsky. Julius Brodsky is another union member, and he's also one of the main editors of the Searchlight, the newspaper that the operating engineers were using. And I wanted to highlight some things in these letters because Julius is becoming suspicious of other union members who Bruce thinks are helpful. And this is the start of the downfall of the man I mentioned before, Joe Grace. So coming from Julius, I'm very much afraid that Joe Grace, who started as the emancipator of the downtrodden and suffering engineers, has now allied himself with as big a bunch of crooks as he is trying to put out. And should he be successful, the same conditions as present will prevail, but a different bunch of crooks will be in the saddle, and the rank and file will be no better off than before. So in this time period, Julius is getting very skeptical of Joe Grace, and Joe Grace is one of the main coordinating members in these 5 different central centers of, New York, Boston, Chicago, and coordinating. So it's pretty concerning that he's starting to step out, and they're wondering if he's coordinating with Huddle. From the second letter on the right, this is November 23rd, 1930. Going off again about Joe Grace. I think that if you will recollect some of our conversations during recent months, you will realize that Grace has neither the ability or integrity to be the leader of such a movement as the present fight. And as for any constructive ideas about reorganizing the International, he rates about 20 below zero. So it's pretty obvious here that Julius is not only becoming skeptical of Joe Grace, but that he's now reconsidering all of the conduct that Grace has been doing for the past couple of months. And he's starting to think if there's others involved with Joe Grace as well. So skipping ahead to the last paragraph, I hope that I never hear nor see of this bird again, as he is more at home in the company of your friend, Mr. Spikings, who, if truth were known, has a larger finger in the pie. So this is another main figure, Walter T. Spikings, who Julius at this time is starting to cast some aspersions on. And this is something that he and Bruce will have to write back and forth about for a long time. And this is just an added complication of trying to bring a federal lawsuit against racketeers. You don't know who your enemies are. And so to me, these letters are so important because it really puts into perspective what Bruce's mindset was at this time. I can see why his anxiety increases. I can see why there may have been some paranoia. I think it would have been really hard to keep going forward if the people who are on your side keep changing. And there's even more traitors to come. So they're skeptical of Joe Grace. They're pretty skeptical of Walter Spikings. And they're going to become increasingly skeptical also of William Green, who is another player in this. And when I say they corresponded about this a lot, I really mean a lot, like constant letter writing about this. We're only a month later in December of 1930, and we have more correspondence between Bruce and Julius. Julius wrote a lot and also used a typewriter, which is fantastic for someone who is going through old letters and trying to read them quickly. So, from the letter on the left, from the December 17th, 1930, he is now convinced about Walter T. Spikings and what he's doing in the lawsuit, and that he's trying to stop the coordination of them, and that he's working with Huddle. There's an old saying that murder will out, and it looks as if the presence of Mr. Spikings and the company of those whom we have always regarded as our enemies has at least definitely confirmed our opinions that there has existed an alliance between this man and those parties who were the original cause of all the present disturbances. And we can now readily understand how and why the great Mr. Grace deemed it expedient to lay off poor Tony. I still don't know who poor Tony is in this case, but I love the laying out of Joe Grace was beginning to take quite a platform. And then he is convinced by Huddle to go over to the other side, the side of the racketeers. And then somehow he gets also Spikings on his side. And then they'll begin to coordinate within Bruce and within Julius and others who are trying to do the lawsuit ways in which to pick off other faithfuls, essentially, like Tony. It is very much like the traitors. And you also see a callback here to Bruce's mention that he was going to get a job in the sanitary district. Coming from the letter on the right, we have more about Joe Grace. And we also have the introduction of another person who I think I know the identity of, but they also only talk in code or in nickname for. So, my dear Bruce, I've been checking up on some of the dates in the case of Mr. Joseph Grace, and I find that on November 1st, he wrote you regarding the reformation of the Big Dutchman, and that it was on November 12th that little Artie was in New York to attend the Big Love Feast. And I would be willing to lay a little bet that there was a little conference on this date, and the plan was for Joe to go ahead and appear as the leader of the rebel movement, and at the same time to hinder it as much as possible. So, just stopping here, this is pretty much Joe Grace's role in a nutshell, and they have now figured it out by the end of 1930. And he will be formally removed from any conversations and planning in the lawsuit going forward. But it is really interesting to see how they were coordinating and also the ways in which they refer to themselves. In terms of the rebel movement, they also refer to themselves as the Bolsheviks and other terms like this. And definitely Julius Brodsky used this red to be playful with reformation because what he's saying is that they're clearly not reformed. And if we go back, he used red again for brother Spikings right here because Spikings is a traitor and he's no longer actually a brother to them. And this is a different letter, not one of these original two, from February 5th of 1931. So, sort of skipping along from Bruce, I just wanted to say, referencing that paranoia, there was a lot of paranoia even amongst Julius and Bruce and other people they coordinated along with that maybe they would be a traitor too. And I think they felt insecure at times. And this is Bruce writing to Julius saying that he has important news and wants to discuss it with him. I also like this letter because, in general, he's discussing his calendar. He drove to Washington. He stopped in Cleveland. He's doing all these things and says it's, quote, a long ride in a Ford. And in response to this letter, Julius is going to be a little cagey. He doesn't like the fact that Bruce is saying that he has news for him, but that he wants to tell him in person and can't write it. And that's going to make Julius really jumpy. And at times, Bruce is going to feel jumpy about Julius too. But from the continued correspondence with both of them, I've pretty much decided that, this was just run of the mill for the time and what was going on. And they both do get over it at some point. So, tuning to that, I want to talk about the tone that Bruce had during this time and those around him, because I think in many ways there were a lot of hopeful moments for Bruce. And there were many points in 1930 and in 1931 when they thought their fight was over. So, yes, they were coordinating this big lawsuit, but they really thought they were making a lot of strides in the court system, and they'd also brought a lot of people to their side. So I think they felt like they were going to win the battle. And I think those moments of hopefulness are really beautiful. So from the left, this is from the subscription section of the Searchlight, which Bruce and Julius corresponded with constantly, sort of talking about why you would want to subscribe to it and why you'd want to give them money, saying that your editor, as well as his associates, are members who could no longer endure the racket existing in both the international and local unions. We therefore begin action to stop same and return all the members all the privileges and rights guaranteed to them as American citizens. And then it goes on to talk about the fight. And then if you see yourself in that fight, that maybe you should consider supporting the paper, because the paper itself is not published for profit, but is self supporting and is the way in which all the locals can coordinate. And also, as Arthur Huddle starts to do more of a smear campaign, they can share their message with one another and not be worried about being censored. And on the right hand side is the response to Bruce's prior letter on the last slide, demonstrating a moment of not so much hopefulness, where Julius Brodsky is very skeptical of Bruce and wondering why he wants to only talk to him in person and not put it in a letter. And he sort of says a couple of things, and then in those middle two paragraphs, he talks a lot about the fact that he needs to prioritize his own self and that he doesn't want to get mixed up further in this battle. And he's not sure if it's going to serve him rationally and business wise. And he's sort of questioning his role in all this. Brodsky will continue on after this, but I do think it's a moment of reality check for both of them. And then Bruce will respond back saying the only reason why he couldn't put it on paper is because he actually had an offer from the US Attorney's Office, who instructed him not to write it down. So it wasn't, in fact, so suspicious, but you can understand with so many people double crossing why everyone would be really concerned about what is going on. Just another example of a hopeful letter. Here's one to Bruce from the editor, Albert McCrane, who is also one of the coordinating members out of New York for the lawsuit, saying that they think that they're pretty damn near close to smashing Local 150. As we know, that's not the case, and it's a current local today. So it's nice to see their hopefulness and that they'd been making some progress at that time, but unfortunately, it is short lived. And then on the really not so hopeful side, although most of the correspondence in Bruce's papers stopped in 1931, we did get a couple from 1932 and 1933, and it wasn't so pretty. This is to Bruce from William Green in 1932, and I'm sure you can read the first line, which is, "What in the hell is the matter with you?" And this is a really complicated relationship with Bruce, and it's also complicated with Julius. They're not sure if William Green is a traitor or not. And so at certain points in their relationship, they share letters that Green sends to one or the other. And then at one point, Green sends them letters saying, "Stop sharing don't share my letters between the two of you." But they continue to do it anyway. So I think as long as it's for the cause, they're going to do anything that they can. And that brings me to something I really wanted to touch on tonight, which is another way in which Bruce was really a part of this labor history. And I didn't want to include very many handwritten letters because they're not fun to read. But this is a letter to Bruce from William Green in January of 1931. And because I know this is not amazing to read, I just gave you a little transcription of what the big thing that he was writing to him about was. And that's that Bruce was going to become so involved in this case, he was going to be subpoenaed as a fact witness to come to Washington and testify against the racketeers. And this is a really big deal. I mean, has so much on his plate. And I was just shocked at the extent to which he was really involved in this lawsuit. Um, and that it's in some ways seemingly lost to history. So this was a really important letter. And as you know, William Green is the president of the American Federation of Labor and will remain so for a long time thereafter. So this is a big person to be coordinating with in general. And Bruce is also mentioned in this Searchlight in the March of 1931 edition, which had quite a caricature on the front page. And then there's a passage on Bruce. And this is right around, as we know from that first episode, the murder, when Bruce gets his police protection. And this article was new to me. All the searchlights we found in his papers in the attic were just in incredible condition. And this talks about the police guard that was given to him after he told the police last night that rival union leaders had threatened him. Ziegler blamed members of the International Union of Operating Engineers, with headquarters at 335 South LaSalle Street, for the threats. So that would be local number 150. For some time, he said he had been receiving mysterious phone calls warning him of an intended attack. Last night, during the union meeting, he received another call, and at the same time, his wife was informed by the telephone that he was to be slain. While the meeting was going on, Ziegler said, 2 automobiles constantly circled the block in which it was held. The license number of one was obtained, and the police said it had been issued to a member of the rival union. So I know that there are many instances of Bruce being threatened, and some of them could be the same instances, but this is another cataloged instance of Bruce being followed with cars. As we know, there was the instance where he had to run through the Board of the Trade building when he was threatened by Maloney and Lynch and he was on foot. And here's another one where it's later found out that it is Maloney and Lynch again following him in cars. So that is pretty intense evidence and just evidence of an intense lifestyle that he was leading at this time. And I also thought it was cute with the Traders reference that he is referred to as faithful, as long with the members of Local 569, and as real men that cannot be intimidated. And one of the last things I want to show you is this engineer's bulletin from January 31st of 1933. And this was the closest I got to the time of his murder with papers that he actually had in this chest. It was shockingly lacking in terms of papers from 1932 and 1933. And I have a couple of different theories why. But using this, I thought it was really interesting the role that Bruce had in this engineer's bulletin, which was this little passage on the back of one of the pages saying any person reading this pamphlet and in sympathy with this method of getting facts concerning the engineers, particularly their misrepresentatives, before the public, may render valuable assistance by sending the facts and any financial assistance they can to D.B. Ziegler. And that is the address of his local at the time, 612 West Adams Street. So he was continuing, even though we had seen at this point in time he was growing increasingly anxious over what was going on with those paving contracts, to be a huge vocal force, not only in this federal lawsuit that takes place previously, but also just going forward with the union. Despite all these threats to his life, despite everything that was going on, he really continued forward. And I thought this was extraordinary, just given that essentially 3 weeks later, he's going to be murdered. And I do wonder if his role in stepping out in this way contributed to it at all. And in terms of Bruce's papers for the night, that's all I have. Let me do a stop my screen share and see if I have any questions. Let's see. Ending my screen share. So just back to me. So any questions you have about the podcast or about any of these sources in general, I really just wanted to think about Bruce and what he had done this evening, because it's just, I don't know, it's important to not only honor it, but we live in a very interesting time politically. And I think it's nice to think back to the people who have come before us and have fought before us. And it didn't end the way he wanted it to for Bruce, but it's just nice to honor him. Okay, it looks like we have a question. Was everyone so vocal? Bruce seemed so brave, and I wondered in the context if others were equally outspoken, if he was more so than others. That's a really good question, and something I've been thinking about a lot. And actually, something I was thinking about last night as I was going through these sources is he corresponded so much with these people. And after he's murdered, I don't see any public rebuke. I don't see any publications regarding these people and Bruce at all. So I do kind of wonder, after he fostered all these relationships and friendships for years, what happened to them. Some people were really vocal. Julius Brodsky is really vocal by putting his name, and same with Albert McCrain, on the, as the editor of the Searchlight, and they distributed it at least once a month and sometimes once a week, depending on the content they had. Um, so yeah, some people were pretty vocal. I'd say Bruce was really vocal in terms of his like day-to-day advocacy. And to me, that's very impressive. Yeah, another comment said, how is he doing this while having such a large family? I don't know. He seems to have 10 different jobs at once, which would, to me, would be very overwhelming. Um, I also think it's a case of, once you start doing something like this, what point do you draw the line? Once you see and uncover a lot of this racketeering and conspiracy work, when would you stop? Um, if it's not at the first death threat, if it's not at the 10th, do you just keep going and hoping that it's all going to work out? So that's the mindset I like to think Bruce had, and I do think his family was incredibly supporting of him. Okay. Yeah, if anyone has any more questions or any comments about Bruce, or anyone else, if someone is a member of organized labor and has lost someone, please feel free to write in a comment or question. Oh, that's a good one. Did anyone carry on his mission after death? They tried. So I believe it's 1935 when Local 569 officially folds. So they put up a good fight for maybe 2 more years. But it becomes really interesting geopolitically, because Roosevelt takes office in March of 1933. So he's going to start to enact some federal reforms and do things that maybe you weren't getting at the local level, that I think kind of assuage some of these issues. And then eventually 569 does fold. I do think when Maloney takes over as sort of the new huddle and puts himself in that place, it's almost inevitable. Um, so it is a really tricky situation, though. Let's see. Oh, to talk more about their struggle with racketeering, or is that too difficult of a subject? Um, it's not too difficult. Uh, if you have a follow up on what exactly you want me to touch on, I'm happy to. I think in terms of like Bruce's struggle or his local struggle with racketeering, unfortunately, I think we have that testimony from Clarence Doneth in the senatorial committee in the 1950s, um, which shows that like a lot of them lost their benefits in that time. Oh, difficult in terms of emotion and being divisive. I I'm really interested in the human aspect of sort of how racketeering came about, and the influence it had on the psyche of those who were participating in it. I think it's a really interesting topic. And when I read through a lot of these letters with Bruce and others, I sort of get to think about the long term effects on all these individual psyches, and sort of what's that like going forward. Okay, another comment. There are a lot of difficult parts of all the histories of all major institutions. Some of them try to address it, some don't. Yeah, in terms of 150, I haven't seen them address it, and that is really interesting to me. If you go on, they have an active website now, and if you go on it and you look at this period in time, they will highlight the successes of William Maloney, which I think he did have some union successes for them. But this specific history of racketeering and all these players, these lawsuits, none of that is mentioned. They don't even mention it as maybe being a tricky time period. They truly tout it as being a time of economic prosperity for them going forward. I have been wanting to contact them. Um, I know it might be semi adversarial if I contact them, but I'm really interested in sort of seeing if they have a non public view that's a little more complex than the one they're just presenting on their website, because it is pretty washed. So, yeah, I do think it would be a good conversation. At least I hope so. I know I've contacted a lot of people throughout this process. I'm sure some have wondered how or why. Another really cool thing was getting in contact with the family member of the eyewitness and seeing if anyone in their family had heard the passed down stories and getting confirmation that they had heard that story almost exactly in the way he had told it, and they knew it. So that was very cool. It didn't help long term, but it was really interesting to see how also family stories are passed down. This is my own family story, but it's also a shared narrative in many ways. And so it's interesting to engage in someone also on what their family's version is as well. Okay, let's see. Any more questions about Bruce or the podcast or anything else? Oh, yeah. The latest episode included a conversation regarding the definition of racketeering. Is it true that the federal RICO laws weren't passed until the 1950s? Yeah, I'm pretty sure they are from the 50s. Um, I think people were using local conspiracy laws there for a while, and that's what necessitated a need for RICO. We know RICO is such a developed case body of law now that it's interesting to think of a time when it just didn't exist and sort of how they were going against, organized criminal syndicates and crime without it. I think that's why you have a couple of in the 1930s, like when you have Al Capone's conviction, it's for tax evasion. And that's sort of what they were using as individual convictions for tax evasion, local charges for conspiracy, and then RICO gives a much broader federal body of laws. And I think the Hobbs Act technically replaces the Anti Racketeering Act of 1934, and then we'll have RICO developed thereafter. Okay. Question. So, how long do they keep police files in paper form in Chicago if there's no plan to digitize for FOIA? I do not know. I have been in contact with the FOIA people again this week. So I lost my appeal, which is fine. I filed another FOIA with the state's attorney's office, who should have these files as represented by the newspapers. And they maintain that after a reasonable search, that they do not have the files. So that's the second body that said that's now Chicago police and the Chicago Cook County state's attorney that do not have the files. So it could be a matter of not looking. I genuinely believe they're non-digitized files. I think they're somewhere, and I think that's also shown by the fact that a professor and assistant in Northwestern did a huge research project, and I believe it covered unsolved homicides in Chicago from 1870 to 1930, just shy of ours, and they had original police reporting. So there's original reporting somewhere, but I do believe technically under the FOIA laws, maybe you don't have to go out and do an extensive search. I know I don't like the FOIA people either. I have a lot of difficult conversations. But I have a new lead, which I've asked to pay for the records of the old coroner's inquiry. So back in the day in Chicago in the 1930s, they used to do a full coroner's inquest, which involved essentially like a mini jury and all sorts of additional things that you just don't have in a modern day death certificate and coroner's report, and you have to pay for those. And so I've heard some people can request those and have a better success because you pay for them and there's a larger search done. So I have requested those, and I'd be really excited. I know Bruce's was done on March 13th, 1933, and I do believe his brother was a part of the inquest as well, which is another of all the angles I've exhausted, that is an angle that's slightly unexhausted. So I'd love to get those and sort of see what's in there. Where are the cats? They're not here. I know. I thought someone might join us, but they decided not to. When the technology had a brief breakdown at the beginning, my energy might have scared them off. So maybe they're not coming back. I know. So we'll see. And yeah, I'm so sorry again about the share screen. It's a classic example of why you shouldn't listen to Google AI. It led me astray. And had I just tried it, it would have worked. So that is a trick. But if anyone doesn't have any more questions, I just wanted to say thank you so much for taking time to talk about Bruce, to think about Bruce in this way. Um, it's incredible. Oh, one more. It's been an incredible experience for me, and I'm just so excited that some people have followed along with it. So one of my episodes mentions the funeral for Bruce at the local church. Are you seeing any evidence of support from the church? So the funeral for Bruce was at a church that the People's Church of Chicago. Yeah, the People's Church of Chicago does not exist anymore. So I've always been curious though if he had like a smaller service somewhere else, more local to his family, since that one felt kind of big. But because, and I was wondering even if I could request records from the People's Church, but it has been, I believe at this point, pretty long shut down. And there is a church in the area of Bruce's house, St. Viator's Church, which is where William Maloney had his funeral. And that's another one of I have a list of what are the things you can exhaust, as this investigation goes on. And that would be talking to that church about William Maloney's funeral. I'm very curious about why it was there when he didn't live in the area. So that is very interesting to me. Okay. Even if you don't find out definitively who was the assassin, feels you've really done justice to his honor and name. Thank you. I hope so. I'm really hoping to produce something from Chicago or Cook County for the family. I think that's been something that's been really important to me this whole time is producing something physical that the family didn't have. And I was even talking with an extended family member today about this and sort of how the family talks about the fact that Bruce was murdered even at the time when his children were alive, but no one really got into this history. This history was kind of lost. I don't know if anyone had an idea of the extent to Bruce's help coordinating all these lawsuits. He was really an advocate for organized labor. And so I do think it's helpful to unearth some of these stories and some of these sources and share them at this time. Okay. In celebrating Bruce, how do you think or feel about his life and how his legacy connects to labor rights today? I see a lot of connections to our political climate and the type of advocacy Bruce was doing. I really do. Um, in some ways, we have the same judiciary that he was involved in, and when a union or anyone else feels like their rights have been abridged, the same opportunities to file for injunctions at the local level and the federal level are available. So, in many ways, it's different organizations are bringing similar actions to Bruce's all the time. The way in which I think it's unique is that we have large class action lawsuits now that are very different to Bruce's time. I think when I looked it up, class action lawsuits had technically started by Bruce's time, but it hadn't really picked up. It was very rare if there were any. So that is a very big shift in terms of how the judiciary works now, um, where labor groups could potentially band together in a different way, whereas Bruce was with the other people he was coordinating with was really trying something for the first time. Um, so yeah, and I do try to go. I've never gone to a ton of labor events in my area, and since I've started this podcast, I've tried to engage in a lot more of those events. Um, and I think about Bruce when I do them. It's important to me. So that's something that I've definitely gotten more engaged on. Oh, a comment or question from my dad. Bruce's youngest, Ted, was born in 1926. He was one of my dad's best friends, born in 1930. So as a toddler, my dad knew Bruce, but would not have any memories of him. Yeah, I think it's also really interesting from a family and from a human perspective, all the connections you can really have. Bruce seems like he is from when I say great great grandfather, it seems like he's from 1850. It's really a lot more it's a lot closer of a history than we really recognize, and I think that's really important going forward. Yes, we're on the 93rd anniversary of his murder, but there are so many connections and parallels through family members and others to date, where it's just maybe like one person in the chain, and then there's a connection to Bruce or Edna, his wife. So I think that's extraordinary. And thank you, Gary. Gary is a guest on the pod all the time. So I'm glad he chimed in here. But this has been incredible. I'm gonna wrap up because it's almost been about an hour, which I was expecting, but I'm just so thankful for one. Do you have any fun facts on Edna? I, before this, asked one of my family members what Edna's favorite drink was when I did my prior stream. And I was really excited to make one of her favorite drinks, and that's when I found out she didn't drink, probably. So I Edna was really funny, like really funny. And I'm not going to do this joke justice. And but she had a lot of like classic jokes and one-liners within the family. And there's one, someone else is going to have to tell it, where I believe some of her sons are going off to World War II, and she makes a joke about him like standing on an elephant's crate or something. Or being larger than an elephant's ass. I don't quite know the joke for sure, but when someone told me it, I did laugh and then forget it. But she was hilarious apparently, like quite a jokester, quite jovial. We get a really different side of her in this podcast because we get the few public statements she's made about Bruce's murder when she's really mad. But she was quite a joyful person. And I really feel like after the family got over this trauma, then the trauma of one of her sons dying, then they also lose their house. I mean, it's a lot going on. I feel like they really picked themselves up as a family and like had many years thereafter of lovely memories throughout the 50s and 60s. So the I really credit Edna with that. And whenever people talk about her, they call her great grandma, and she just seemed lovely. I'm genuinely bummed to not have known her, as well as one of her daughters, Dodie. I really wish I got to know Dodie. Every story about her is just lovely, and fantastic, and she was glamorous. And I'm really inspired by Edna and all of her children and sort of the trajectory they went on. And yes, Gary has been a fabulous guest. Oh, from Gary again. Edna told my mom, "It's so sad to see your kids turn into senior citizens." I believe she said that. Edna was a trip. So Edna also lived with my great grandma Sarah in Chicago. They lived together. I believe in the basement. Someone's going to correct me if I'm wrong. The basement of another family member's house, or it's a duplex with like a first floor and a second floor. So it was a lot of family members all in one area in Portage Park in Chicago. So yeah, quite a family unit. Okay. Well, I will end there. Thank you so much for coming along. And if you're interested in any of those primary sources or want to see them again, just shoot me an email, DM me on Instagram. I will send them, I'll post them. So if you want to see them or you're interested in them, they're only available like from Bruce's archive. It's not a publicly available document. So I'm happy to share. And thank you for coming along, even though I messed up the initial stream. Take care.